So my name is Lee. I've been speaking to a lot of your teachers, trying to set up today. We are a company who are based in South Africa, but we work with schools from all over the world, but predominantly in the UK. And we bring people down to South Africa to try and show them the wonders of what's down there. You're going to be introduced to Mike, who is my business partner. We met at university about 18 years ago now, 18, 19 years ago. We were both at Bangor University. So, Mike, do you want to jump in and give us a wave and say hello?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm calling in from Cape Town, South Africa. So we're here today to answer some of your questions, speak to you about the trip that's available, but also hopefully give you some valuable feedback and answers to your questions, to your interests and intrigue into marine biology. And I'm going to do a very sort of quick talk about some of the sharks that we see over here, just to get you guys inspired and excited about some of the different shark species.
Well, thanks, Mike. So, as we said, we are a company that are set up based in the UK, based in South Africa, and we're going to be talking about a few different regions in False Bay. We're going to be talking about a few different animals, specifically sharks today. And just so you can get a little bit of a flavour of where we're based, what the environment looks like, and what our students do when they come with us, I'm just going to show you a short video. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, so like I said, hopefully that is a good indication of what sort of things we do. You will have seen students there in the cages with sharks. So again, Mike will talk a little bit more about some of the sharks that we work with, but we work with great white sharks, we work with bronze whaler sharks, and those are the kind of big sharks that you can get into the cages with, and obviously have that immersive experience face to face. So what we're going to do now is a couple of questions have come in prior to today's talk when we asked people to send them through. And I'm going to put a few of those to Mike now because I suspect quite a few people want to know the same kind of questions. So, Mike, can you come back in and I'm going to put some questions to you.
So, at school, I basically took the three sciences and sort of did the extra science classes. And then as you go to college or sixth form, I then took law, psychology, and environmental science. But I believe these days there's much broader spectrum of modules that you can take or programs that you can take, which might even include marine biology or zoology or conservation. And then I moved on to university to do my undergrad at Bangor, like Lee was mentioning earlier, where I did zoology and conservation, actually. And so essentially the way education, the academic sort of system works is you start very broad and you kind of close in on your interests and area of interest and go into sixth form and then, or A levels, and then degree level, you kind of find those different avenues. And then anything after that, so like master's, PhD, then you kind of start to specialize in on sort of certain areas. And my area was sharks, specifically white sharks. So I became a white shark scientist, but that might be any kind of thing. So the specific marine biology side of what I do actually came after university, as I specialized into more and more things. So I had a very broad spectrum of knowledge from previously. So yeah, basically following the path of following sciences. A lot of people say maths. I'm not good at maths. Maths was never a strong point for me, but it is very useful once you get into the marine science world. And then, yeah, basically pick the modules which suit your interests best, really. But like I say, now there's a much wider spectrum of courses that you can do at college and university.
Brilliant, thank you. Somebody said, where is the best place to study?
In terms of universities, the UK's got a fantastic number of universities which are all doing various forms, like I say, so oceanography, marine biology, marine science, marine conservation, zoology and conservation, all of those sort of subjects are kind of overlapping in a lot of modules and a lot of places. I went to Bangor, which is a very good place for its marine science and conservation. Aberdeen in Scotland, Exeter, Plymouth, Cardiff. There's a basically usually it's the coastal places. Hull is very good. Hull University. Yeah, so a lot of the coastal places often have their own sort of research labs and things which you can get hands-on in as well. So it's basically just a case of researching around, looking around, but there's probably a good 10 or 15 universities in the UK which are world class in their marine science and marine biology modules.
Brilliant. Okay, so there's a couple of questions as well, but I'll save them until after the presentation. So obviously we've said we're going to talk about the sharks of South Africa. I know that you've put a few slides together to try and explain to everybody what sort of animals you're dealing with. So can you can start sharing your screen now, Mike, and then start to talk us through it, please.
Alrighty, guys. So yeah, I've just thrown a few slides together for you guys just to talk to you a bit about sharks of False Bay. So False Bay is our sample area here in Cape Town. So we're in South Africa. Then we're in Cape Town, which is the city, which is right on the south coast, southwest coast of South Africa. And then out the bottom of Cape Town, there's a peninsula. And on the one side of the peninsula is False Bay, and that's where we're based, out of a town called Simonstown. And it's an incredibly biodiverse area, not just for sharks, but for invertebrates, stingrays, whales, dolphins, penguins. It's got an incredible number of different species in this area. And that's what makes it such a cool, attractive place for educating people about the ocean, about marine biology, and about conservation. So when we think of sharks, I'm sure a number of us automatically think of sort of the big, charismatic, exciting Shark Week Nat Geo Discovery Channel sharks. Okay, so here's a few of those, or 4 of those. So as you look at the screen, I believe top left is the white shark. I think that's your top left. So big, everyone knows about the white shark, and that's sort of the big king shark, which everyone thinks about. We'll talk a bit more about these guys a little bit later, but essentially False Bay was famous for its white sharks up until 2015, until mysterious happenings occurred, and we'll talk about that now. Next to that on the top right is the mako shark, a close relative to the white shark, a little bit smaller and a little bit more warm water orientated and pelagic. Bottom left is the blue shark, one of the most fished and finned sharks in the world. Used to be one of the most widely spread and common sharks in the oceans, and in the last 10 years has now become endangered. And then the bottom right there is a whale shark, and you might think a whale shark is a tropical warm water shark, and it is, you're right. However, interestingly, I put this one in because the first ever specimen of a whale shark was first documented in Cape Town, which is completely bizarre and quite a long way from its home range up the east coast of South Africa. But what happens is they get caught in warm currents, trapped in these little circulations of warm water. And as that sort of dissipates into the colder waters of the Atlantic, they get trapped in the cold water and they often end up beaching on local beaches. And so naturalists, long time ago, found the first specimen of a whale shark. So my point is, everyone thinks of these. You might think of bull sharks and tiger sharks as well. They're not found in False Bay. They're not found in this area of South Africa, but they are found in South Africa further up the coastline. But there's there's around 500 species of sharks and rays, okay? And 2/3 of those occur in South Africa. And there's a whole spectrum of different species which we need to educate people about and understand before we start lumping sharks into one big bin of big, scary, charismatic sharks. And so I've got a few of them here. So here's a spotted gully shark. Okay, it grows to about 2 meters. They're quite small, very skittish. And these guys will hang out in 1 meter of water right off the beach in certain areas, completely harmless to humans. Their mouth is the size of maybe my hand. They're not interested. They're very skittish and scared and swim away when you get anywhere near them, usually, unless you know how to approach them a bit more stealthily. And they're a beautiful shark. And like I say, yeah, right in the very shallow waters of False Bay, right in our doorstep here. Then we've got the spotted 7-gill cow shark. Now, this is a really cool shark. And if we flick back to this gully shark, you'll see it's got the dorsal fin, the second dorsal fin, and the tail. Super sort of, everyone knows that's what kind of the structure of a shark looks like. Well, interestingly, the cow shark has a very different structure. Its dorsal fin, that big famous fin on the back of the shark, it only has one, and it's set very far back on the dorsal side of the shark. And this is one of the signs of a very prehistoric shark. It's one of the oldest species of sharks known. So I've got a little video which I'm going to just flick through and show you some clips of. Again, harmless to humans and divers, as you'll see in this clip. We're diving with them in the kelp forests off the coastline. Very relaxed, super calm, chilled sharks. You can get quite close to them without causing any stress. And you'll notice in their name, they're called the broad-nosed 7-gill cow shark. Now, most sharks have 5 gills. But these guys have 7 gills, okay? We've got the 6 gill, we've got the 7 gill, and then most of the sharks are 5 gills. And that's another sign of it being such a prehistoric species. So having the old gill slits of the extra 2 pairs on either side. And these guys used to be very, there was a lot big aggregations of them, again, until that mysterious occurrence happened in 2015. And now these guys have become quite scarce as well in the area. Oops. Then we've got our bronze whaler, or our copper sharks. Now, many of you may have known this copper shark.
Mike, just put your screen back into full screen mode, please.
Okay. Okay, so there's some sharks. Now there's a couple of, quite a few rays as well we get in this area. And this one's endemic to the area, which is basically meaning it doesn't occur anywhere else, just in these small coastal areas of South Africa. It's called the one-fin electric ray. And they're quite small, size of a dinner plate, often like shallow, sandy bottom areas. And they can zap with a very strong electrical pulse, a bit like an electric ray. And that's how they hunt their prey, or they deter seals or maybe larger sharks which are feeding on them, to give them a chance to swim away and get out of the mouths of the predator. So again, very interesting species. And then we've got the short-tailed stingray, which is a global species. It operates all over the world. And these are the largest species in the world of stingray. And you may know these guys for famously barbing Steve Irwin. Okay, now that sort of caused the whole hysteria around the world about stingrays being dangerous. I can tell you these guys are the least dangerous things at all. They're super calm, super shy, and sort of stay away from humans as much as possible. And what Steve Irwin got himself in a mess because he kind of trapped the ray underneath from the surface and from the top, and it was just very unfortunate that where that ray threw its tail up just happened to be straight into his heart. But the chances of that happening are absolutely minimal. And these guys are super peaceful, graceful species, and they can grow up to like 3 meters wide from side to side. And they basically feed on small little crabs and worms and things filter through the sand at the bottom, and yeah, basically feed on very small bits and bobs. So we talked about the charismatic sharks right at the start and the big, exciting, essentially potentially dangerous ones, but we also have hundreds of different other species of sharks which look very similar to these guys. Now these guys are endemic to the area as well, and we call them shy sharks or benthic sharks. Now, unlike the other sharks that we've just shown you, who, as everyone knows, sharks constantly swim. Now that's because they use something called ram ventilation, where they must force the water through their gills, through their mouth, over their gills, to continuously get dissolved oxygen from the oceans, from the water, over their gills, and they can breathe. So they must always swim to be able to do that, or face into strong currents at least. Now these guys, they can sit on the bottom and pump when their first gill oxygenated water over their gills. And that's great because these guys are not apex predators like a lot of the larger sharks. These guys are what we call mesopredators. Okay, so they are predators essentially in the ecosystem, but there are other bigger predators, bigger sharks and seals, which will feed on these guys. So they need to be stealthy both for their hunting, but also to hide from prey. So they get their name shy sharks because if they are attacked by a seal or a larger fish or shark, what they'll do is they'll curl up in a tight ball and put their tail over their head and sort of hide their eyes. And so they look bizarre. They're much bigger and thicker donut kind of thing. So it makes it harder for them to be swallowed and eaten by the shark or the seal. Now we've got 4 species of these guys in this in False Bay and around South Africa, and they're super interesting. But unfortunately, as you'll see, we've got their IUCN red listing as well, and they are also endangered. Okay. Now another interesting thing about these sharks that we're showing you now are they lay eggs. Okay, so that's a picture of an egg under the name there. They're about maybe 10, 15 centimeters in length. And you'll see they've got these tendrils at the end, these little wiry, stringy bits. So what they do is when they're ready to lay, those tendrils will stick out and they'll turn tight circles around a piece of kelp. It'll attach to the kelp and pull the eggs out of the female. And that means the eggs will be secured in a nice spot, which will be inside the kelp forest in an ecosystem where when they're laid, when they hatch out of the egg, they'll be surrounded by food and surrounded by shelter to hide from the predators. So that's a really cool evolutionary step that these guys have made. And you'll also see their eyes on this picture on the left-hand side. They look like cat eyes, which is also where they get the name cat sharks. This is a dark side shark, which is essentially the same size. So these guys grow to about 30 to 40 centimeters. Okay, so do these guys. They look very much similar, apart from they're darker. And that's why they're called the dark side shark. Similar eggs, except a bit darker, similar size. Okay, and you'll see here that their IUCN red listing is data deficient. Now, this means we don't have enough data as scientists to be able to tell if their population is stable, if it's increasing or decreasing. And so it's really important that we are able to collect this data and find out what's going on with these populations of sharks, so we can control and manage their conservation if they are struggling or endangered. We've got the pajama shark. Now, if anyone's seen My Octopus Teacher, you'll be familiar with these guys. These are the villain, the bad guy in My Octopus Teacher, who tries to eat the octopus. But in our world, these are the good guys, and we're trying to look after these guys because, again, you can see there they're near threatened. These guys grow up to about 1 meter long. They're quite nocturnal, so we only really see them mostly in the late afternoon into the evening. And they've got these stripes from nose to tail, so they look like they're wearing pajamas. And their eggs are much bigger. They've got sort of a 15, maybe 20 centimeter size egg, the pajama shark. Then we've got the leopard shark, again, data deficient. So we're looking at ways to find this data to make sure we can look at their populations. So here at Cape Ed, what we're doing is we're getting people involved in a program called FinSpotter through our Marine Research Station here in Simonstown. And students get involved in coming into the kelp forest, searching for these sharks, assisting to find them, point them out to the scientists who can then dive down and take photos of these beautiful patterns, these stripes and these spots and these markings. And we then use artificial intelligent machine learning to trace these sharks, put them into a database and cross-reference these photos with each other and to see the markings, as these markings are like fingerprints, they don't change over time. And that allows us to collect data on their populations. Okay, so these areas where it says data deficient on the IUCN Red List, we're directly contributing data towards these gaps in the data field now. And not only are we doing that as scientists, but we're getting the public and recreational snorkelers and divers and school groups and school kids and college students involved in taking these photos and helping us. Because the more people who get in the water, we can all get hands-on, direct, effective research for these guys. So as you know, as I just mentioned, these guys are laying eggs. So they start off as an egg. They hatch out as a tiny little young baby, probably about twice the size of the egg because they kind of fold in two in the egg. And then they grow rapidly over a number of years. And these sharks can actually live for 15 to 25 years. Okay, so they're long-living sharks and they're very slow to reproduce. They only lay 1 to 2 eggs every 1 to 2 years. So you can imagine once they are, their populations are depleted through things like habitat loss, overfishing, bycatch. It takes them a long time to recover in their populations. So it's even more important that we find ways to conserve them and count their populations. So right up at the start of this talk, we alluded to something happening in 2015, and I'm sure a lot of you may be aware of the killer whales, and maybe some of you are not aware, but basically in 2015, 2 killer whales called Port and Starboard they came into False Bay and they started hunting white sharks and cow sharks. And they became notorious killers of white sharks. And since 2015, 2016, we've not seen white sharks in our bay since this whole thing happened. The reason why they're called Port and Starboard is because you can see in this caricature of the killer whales, their fins are bent. One goes left, one goes right. So the one that goes left, port, because it's a nautical theme, and the one goes right, starboard. And they've been moving all the way along the coast of South Africa over the last 10 years, 9 years, hunting white sharks and cow sharks, and only taking the livers, which you may have seen as well. So we can maybe talk about this in a little bit more detail if there's questions. And basically, it's thought that they're sort of chasing the sharks, tiring them out, bumping them, flipping them over into tectonic state where they kind of can't move. And then they slice them open in a very surgical way and take their liver. Because as we mentioned before, 2 things about sharks, why they must constantly swim. Firstly, to breathe with that ram ventilation. And second of all, a shark will sink if it stops swimming. And that's because they don't have swim bladders like fish, which they can fill with air or lipids, fats, and sort of move that around depending on how deep they are, and can sort of almost like a buoyancy aid. They have big, massive, thick livers, which are about a third of their body weight, and they're full of lipids and fats, and that's hugely nutrient to killer whales. And so the killer whales can feed on a shark's liver, and it keeps them going for a good long time. And the rest of the body is quite useless to them. And so it's really wasteful as well. And we only know about this is because in 2016, 2015, 9 white sharks washed ashore. And that's just the ones that washed ashore, not the ones that necessarily sank to the bottom and were never seen again.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike.
No, I haven't. Now, I'm lucky. I've spent almost 15, 18 years diving with sharks all around the world, different types of sharks, big sharks, little sharks, open ocean, reef systems, and I've dived with sharks probably more than most people, and I've only really had 2 or 3 incidents where I felt minorly threatened or a little bit threatened, and the rest of the time, sharks are generally not interested, and I've never been bitten either.
So there's another question. Have you ever swam with a shark? Obviously, you've just shown some videos before of swimming with cow sharks. And obviously, there's a lot of shark species down in South Africa, isn't there? So a lot of our students end up also coming down to swim with sharks with us. Certainly, when we're swimming with some of the bigger sharks, like you said, we put the cages out, and you will have seen some of that hopefully in the video. But yeah, in terms of have you ever swam with sharks, I think I can answer that one for you, Mike. It's very much a yes, isn't it? What about some of the species that maybe we haven't talked about? So there is a question here about bull sharks. So I know that you said that they're not particularly native to South Africa, but could you maybe just quickly explain how bull sharks can go into both types of water, both fresh and salt?
Yeah, so we do have bull sharks in South Africa, but not this far down in Cape Town. They're more in the warmer waters. They have a bit more of a temperature restriction range, and they like the warmer waters. And yeah, like you say here, the bull sharks have this very unique. Well, it was originally thought to be very unique, but over the last few years, we've actually seen a number of different sharks be able to do this to certain extents as well. And essentially, they can move from salt water to fresh water. Now, it was originally thought that you were either a marine species, salt water, or a freshwater species in the river. And then you get some brackish water species like the bull shark. I was actually involved in a bull shark tagging and tracking project in 2011, where we tracked the largest bull shark ever recorded because it was pregnant, as the furthest up a freshwater system that was ever recorded. So it was quite a groundbreaking research. And it was like a 4.5-meter bull shark. And this shark moved about 12 kilometers upriver, which was really incredible. And the reason they can do this is because they are able to basically like balance their blood. So essentially, the reason why they can only stay in, some sharks can only stay in salt water is because their blood can't handle low levels of salt, and freshwater fish can't handle high levels of salt. But bull sharks and a few different other species now can basically balance their blood through like this sort of sieving and sort of basically sieving of the water before it goes through into their blood system and their gills, and it allows them to be able to be just as efficient in fresh or salt water. It's basically a physiological evolution.
Well, so again, I'm going to field a few more questions here. There's one that was saying about if sharks are always moving, how do they sleep? Now, I know you mentioned earlier on about how some sharks don't need to move. What about the ones that are constantly moving? Do you know how they sleep?
Yeah, so sharks do sleep, kind of, but not the way you think, not the way we sleep. So essentially, what they'll do is relax areas of their brain when they're not needed. And in terms of the swimming side of things, what they'll do is they'll use that sinking, that heavy, obviously, like I say, they'll sink if they stop swimming. So they'll swim up to the surface and then they'll just basically glide down into the water column and very sort of slowly sink down into the depths. And then when they get to a certain depth or whenever they're ready, they'll kind of swim back up to the surface again, and then they'll relax and sink down again. So we know this from tracking data, and we've used sort of depth gauges on their tracking tags on the sharks. And any shark that's moved great distances, you'll see that they spend, first of all, they spend a lot of time at the surface. And then at night, they tend to have this behavior where they sort of sink down very, very deep, then come straight up to the surface quite rapidly, and then drop down again. And so the data looks like this, so sort of the graph. And that's thought to be their resting period, where they're kind of relaxing on that sink down. And another way they do it in the coastal areas is they use, they go right in behind the breakers. Now, you might have seen in various places that there's sharks in surf zones, right behind the white water of where people are surfing. Now, the reason for this is not because they're looking for surfers. It's because where the waves are breaking on the coastline, it's smashing that white water is basically filling with oxygen as it smashes down and it increases the dissolved oxygen in the water. And so those areas right in the break wave area are full of oxygen. And so it means the shark is getting way more oxygen through its gills just from being in that area. It's a bit like being in an oxygen chamber. And they don't have to swim as fast and they can relax a little bit. So they can use those areas as well to increase their oxygen intake and reduce their need to swim as fast.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Let's see if you know some of these, Mike. Do you know what the smallest shark is and how small it is?
The smallest shark. I'm not sure exactly what it would be, but it would be probably something like a cat shark, those ones that I was just showing at the end of the presentation. You know, they grow up to about 20, 30 centimeters. So a baby one of those is maybe the size of your finger when it first comes out of its egg. So they obviously start very small and then they grow quite rapidly, but they're quite small. But essentially, yeah, sharks are all sizes. They're very small, very big, and everything in between. And there's a huge diversity of different species. So yeah, probably a type of cat shark or ground shark or spear shark.
So sticking with that kind of theme, I guess then, do you know what the first shark will have been from obviously a historical evolutionary point of view? Or where did they come from, maybe?
Well, so yeah, so basically sharks evolved, everything evolved essentially, if we go far back enough, evolved from sort of the same things. But the shark branch in the evolutionary tree branches off about 400 over 400 million years ago. Okay, so sharks themselves are one of the oldest species roaming the planet, and they essentially diversify depending on where they are and evolve, geographically split off, and new species evolve from populations that are genetically sort of splintered off from the core group, and then over the years that's kind of created all these different evolutionary adaptations and changes in the species. But yeah, the ancient oldest sharks are things like the cow sharks, the 6 gills and the 7 gill sharks, which, like I say, have that prehistoric sort of gill structure with the extra gills, and also the different dorsal fin structure as well.
Real. Okay, what about so talking about shark pregnancy now? There's a couple of questions coming about that. So you mentioned earlier on about some sharks having laying eggs, which we call like mermaids, pursers, etc. But what about the sharks that give birth to live birth? How long are they pregnant for usually?
So sharks are really cool and really weird when it comes to this kind of thing. So some sharks lay eggs, some sharks give birth to live sharks. Some sharks have eggs inside, they hatch inside, and then they come out of the shark. And there's all sorts of different ways that sharks have evolved to do their laying of their offspring as well. And yeah, some sharks can be pregnant for 6 to 12 months. The larger species generally, basically the larger the species, the longer it takes. But most sharks, even those cat sharks that we talked about, take at least 5 or 6 months in terms of producing an egg, mating, producing the egg, and laying the egg. And then it can take another 6 to 8 months for the egg to hatch before it hatches. So all across sharks, it's a very slow process of creating the next generation. And that's why sharks are so fragile in terms of populations and the way that overfishing can affect what shark populations rapidly. Some sharks lay eggs once a year or every 6 months, or like they'll have a once-off lay. Other sharks, like the whale shark, they basically have like this conveyor belt where they'll have juveniles and eggs inside them, all at different levels and different progress. So some of them will be grown and they'll come out live. Others will still be in the egg stage inside the mother, and there's kind of like a conveyor belt of different levels of progress. So it's super fascinating and it's very species specific. But yeah, it's amazing how sharks have evolved to do all these different types of gestation periods and reproduction.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to go back to a couple of questions that have come in that maybe relate back to marine biology, studying, etc. So you can probably answer this quite briefly, I guess. But someone's asking, do you need to learn to dive?
You don't need to. So to be a marine biologist, you're not necessarily going to be diving in the water every day or out on boats. Okay, there's a lot of different varied jobs that you can get into. Some of them are lab based, some of them are desk based, some of them are research writing based with a little bit of field work. Others are predominantly diving and predominantly sort of field based. So it really depends on the type of job that you have. Being a field biologist or being a marine biologist is not just about being in the water. Having said that, if you're a marine biologist and you're interested in marine biology, you probably want to learn to dive because it's obviously that's where you want to be to learn and see and observe and enjoy what your passion is. So you don't have to be a diver. So if you've got medical issues or whatever, for whatever reason you can't dive, it doesn't rule you out of being a marine biologist. But if you can dive and you want to dive, then I would recommend it because it's a great place to see what you're interested in.
Well, and then with Cape Ed, when we have our students down in South Africa, they're at the surface, they're snorkeling, they're free diving, they're going down, and they're in 2 meters to 5-6 meters, aren't they? So it's not dive.
A lot of work that we do and a lot of trips that we do are they're all snorkel based for school groups because you don't to become a scuba diver. It's like a 4-day quite intensive course, but also snorkeling. You can see things, and we can also talk to you at the surface and teach you what's going on, and we can talk about the different species and what's seeing them and how things are behaving together, and we can give you that educational side of it. So a lot of our work is free diving and snorkeling.
Well, how many years in uni did it take for you to get to the position where you are?
So generally speaking, undergrad level is 3 to 4 years, depending on if the honours is built in or not. And then you can do a master's, which is generally 2 to 3 years. And there's different types of masters. You can do a master's by research, where basically you do a mini research project, and so you're not sort of in classes all the time. You're doing your own project. And then other masters where you are in modules and classes, as well as like a much smaller project. And then a PhD depends. I know guys who've done it in 3 years. I know people who are just in their 10th year. So it all depends on sort of how you go with your PhD. It's a bit of a very variable one, that. But yeah, I mean, to get to master's level, you're talking probably 5 or 6 years.
Well, I think you mentioned earlier on about kind of subjects that you studied and things like that. And there's questions coming in that say about what grades do you need to be able to get into this job? Because certainly some professions, like maybe becoming a vet, we're expecting some of the top grades, etc. Is it similar in marine biology? Do you have to get the top grades in class to be able to become a marine biologist, or what sort of grades might you need?
To be a scientist, you have to have reasonably good grades, and obviously that's what you're aiming for. But it's not like it's very varied because the job element, once you've done your degree, once you've done your studies, what job you're going to go into, and it's so varied. There's no real. It's not like being a doctor or a vet where you do your studies and you go straight into a job and the whole career chain is written out for you and you know exactly what you're doing. A marine biologist, there's so much variation in the job aspects, and so having a degree is vital, but whether you apply that degree directly or indirectly or not at all is also, depends. So I always explain to people that there's sort of three main avenues in terms of getting a job, and that is government based, which is working for the government, and then there's private NGO base, where you're working for a small charity or NGO or NPO, and then there's academia. So you stay in the university and you become a lecturer and a researcher or a professor or something like that. And so obviously if you're going into academia, then your grades need to be really good and you're competing with other people who want to become researchers and professors. Government, again, depends on the job at times. So essentially, obviously the best grades, the better. But it's not just about your grades. Being a marine biologist isn't just about your grades. Being a marine biologist and a conservationist and a biologist or a zoologist, it's about experience and understanding the practical side of things as well, whether that's field-based in terms of diving and boat work and field work, whether that's lab-based and you work in laboratories, or whether that's a teaching on an educational sort of front. So it's not just based on your academic ability, although it is important as a scientist to have that academic ability.
Yeah,
if
brilliant.
That's clear.
Yeah. So quite often when we do talks like this with school, we get people who say, what's a typical day for a marine biologist? And quite often a lot of people want to know what a typical salary is. I think it's a really difficult question to answer that, isn't it, really, in terms of what is a typical salary, what's a typical day? Because as you just explained, there's loads of different avenues that you can go into, isn't there? So the typical salary is very much dependent on what kind of dimension you go into, isn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're working for, academia in a university, then those wage structures are a bit more structured, and you sort of get your basic level. Then, as your experience grows and your ability to publish papers or teach students, lecture, etc., you kind of have those graded pay levels to professorships and things like that, and that's much more structured, and you can research that quite easily on the website, on the internet, as to what, depending on the university and the country and the area of the country, what they might be. But then when you move into sort of government jobs and NGOs, then it's completely variable depending on years of experience, level of academic qualification, ability on various equipment or software. So yeah, it's very variable and it's very difficult to give a good answer, a good solid answer to that. Generally speaking, marine biology, marine science, it's not the best paid job. It depends how you break down, things, because there are quirks. You might get a chance to travel a lot, which will be paid for. You might get a chance to do really interesting things, but you might not get paid that much to do them. But at the same time, marine biology jobs are few and marine biologists are many. So it's a very competitive field. So that does affect the sort of competition a lot as well. But yeah, it's a really difficult question to answer.
It is. Okay, let's go back to some of the questions on sharks then now. So there's a question that when it says, do all sharks lay eggs? Obviously, we've explained earlier on that no, they don't. And then there's a question that says about, do they fight before they're born? Now, I know some tiger sharks, they will, whichever one emerges first in the womb with the other eggs that are around it, they will in fact eat all of their other eggs, don't they, to basically become the dominant shark, and that's the one that's born. So I know certainly with sand tiger sharks, there's only ever one, one from each ovary, because they have two ovaries, don't they, Mike? One each side.
Yeah, there's a few species that do that, and they basically, yeah, whichever ones lay first or hatch first in the egg inside the mother will eat the other eggs or the other whatever stage they're at, and then they'll hatch, and then the next one will get a chance. So yeah, it does happen, and they form their jaws very early on in their mother, so they are able to eat
Attack their
their
brothers and sisters.
siblings.
Yeah. Here's a really good question. What about how do sharks respire and keep up the demands of energy in order to keep moving? So how is it that the muscles don't tire? Do you know this?
So a lot of their muscle, well, first of all, they're basically pure muscle. They're full of muscle, and their muscles are super efficient. They're very basically a lot of what we call short twitch muscles. So strong, hyperactive, and very efficient. So obviously these guys have been evolving for 400 million years. They've made their bodies super streamlined, very hydro efficient in terms of moving through the water. That's their fins and their sort of torpedo nose face in a lot of sharks helps with their efficiency moving through the water. Also, on their skin, their scales are very cleverly evolved to basically they as the shark moves through the water, the scales kind of cause these little vortexes in the water, which push the water friction away from the shark, and it allows the shark to move through the water way smoother and way more efficiently. So it's not actually using as much strength to swim through the water. So they've got all these little minor evolutionary tweaks and twerks which help them be more efficient and keep their muscles as low cost and low energy as possible. And they've also got that explosive power as well if they want to. And they have something called a areta mirabella, which is an organ inside. And sharks can actually, although they're not classed as warm-blooded, they can actually increase the temperature of their core a little bit like a mammal by using this areta mirabella. And that essentially helps them with their muscle and their movement and their efficiency and strength because they can stay warmer than the surrounding water temperatures. So it keeps their muscles strong and efficient as well.
Interesting question about actually orcas. You mentioned port and starboard before, the two orcas that have been attacking the great whites. And obviously the great whites have now started to migrate much further up the coast. If we normally see a flopped over fin, curled over fin in captivity, do we have any ideas about why it might be happening to the non-captive orcas, the transient orcas in the water?
Yeah, so just to clarify, port and starboard are wild orcas. Okay, they've not been released from SeaWorld or from domestic place. They are wild. Now, you're correct in saying that in captivity, something like 80% of killer whales have that folded over dorsal fin. And that's because of various reasons: stress, dehydration, malnutrition, all sorts of different reasons. It usually is a sign of not a very healthy individual. In wild, I think it's something less than 5% of wild killer whales have that curled over dorsal. Now, for two individuals who are moving around together is quite interesting. But there have been genetics taken of these individuals, and they are genetically linked. It's like they're likely to be something like cousins, effectively. So they do have a genetic similarity, and so it's probably just a genetic mutation, which has meant that their dorsal fins are both floppy.
Well, do you think AI will change your job? Now, you mentioned before about fin spotter as one of the things that we use, and the students obviously take pictures of the sharks, then we put them into the database. So can you maybe think of any other applications of AI and how it might change a marine biologist's job?
AI is going to change everyone's job and everything. And the way, just to give you an example of what we're doing and how we're using it, you can basically, it can go against you or you can work with it and make it a tool or a weapon. And the way we've made it a tool is by using it to basically, we can collect huge amounts of data. And historically, a human would have to go through that data and sort that data and put it in the right places and analyze it. What we're finding now is that we can rapidly analyze and sort data so fast that we can collect way more data and use it much quicker. And so part of what we're doing, like you say, with the fin spotter, and also with other areas of work like BRUVs, which is like a camera which records sharks and fish, we're using AI to pick out these images in our photos and our videos, identify the shark or the species of fish or the species of whatever, I measure it, identify it, put it across our database and tell us if it's a match with another individual that we photographed in the past. And that allows us to create population estimates way quicker than we used to. So that's just sort of one example of how we're using AI as a tool.
Well, what about communication with sharks? Do sharks communicate? And if they do, how do they communicate?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and it's very difficult to answer. So some sharks are solitary. So generally speaking, most sharks are solitary. There'll be aggregations of sharks. So there'll be lots of sharks in an area, but they won't be connected in terms of communication or anything. They'll mate together, and if there's a food source, they'll come together and share the food source or fight for the food source. But they're not connected in any way. But then there are certain species, for example, the bronze whaler or copper shark, they actually come together in groups and they sort of hang around in groups and they hunt together. And so do cow sharks as well, almost like hyenas or whatever. So there must be some kind of communication between individuals. We're still not really sure what this communication is. In terms of senses, sharks have an extra sense to us. We've got the normal 5 senses, and then they also have something called the central line and the ampulla of Lorenzini. So they can pick up electrical pulses and they can pick up vibrations in the water. So whether it's some kind of vibration or low measured sound wave or something, or maybe it's a chemical cue and they're releasing chemical cues out somewhere. We don't really know. So this is like a real kind of interesting question. It's still frontline of research, and we're still kind of the scientists investigating this all the time.
Certainly, I know at the moment with the orcas turning up in False Bay and obviously the sharks, the great white sharks leaving, there's a suggestion there that there's some form of communication because as soon as the orcas arrive, the white sharks disappear, don't they? It's almost whether it is a sensory one, are they picking up on scents in the water and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And they're leaving like if one comes in, then the whole lot of white sharks disappear. So it's almost like either the sharks are picking up on something from the killer whales, or there's some kind of intercommunication between the individuals who are saying, let's get out of here, it's dangerous. So yeah, it's still very unknown. It's super interesting.
So I think obviously, unfortunately, we're coming towards the end of our hour now. And I know that obviously school will be starting to finish for most people or many people. So let's just end with one final question to you, Mike. What is your favorite shark?
Favorite shark has got to be the great white shark, just because it's just awe-inspiring, incredible big. I know it's cliche, but it is just the most incredible thing to see in the wild, in the water. And now, because they've moved away from False Bay, I've not seen one for a long, long time. And I used to see them every single day. I used to be a shark scientist with white sharks, tagging, tracking them, working with them. And now I've not seen them for so long. So yeah, I've got to say the white shark.
Well, I'm going to have to say a cow shark because it's one of the first sharks that I saw when I actually got into the water in South Africa many, many years ago. And they look very funny as well, and they're quite docile and what have you. Okay.
They look like old man is not put his teeth in.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us, guys. We do these every term or so. So teachers, look out for some more emails coming your way. And then please, if you want any more information about some of the trips and stuff that we can do or how you can get involved, you've got our emails, send us some messages. And we'll hang around here for a minute or two if anyone wants to ask any particular questions. But apart from that, thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. And yeah, check us out if you want to join a course or a trip.